Hi, everyone. I think we are probably now live. So we'll go ahead and get started with just a couple of little ground rules. So if you're in the audience, set your screen to gallery view so that you can see all of us. The chat roll is live for your comments, but if you have questions, please pop the questions in the question and answer box, and we will try and have time at the end for questions from the audience. So I'm Bailey Bridgewater. I'm going to be moderating, and I do want to go ahead and introduce everyone before we start in with the questions. So myself, like I said, I'm Bailey Bridgewater. I'm the author of the Louisa Leinbach Mystery Series, which includes Come Find Me in the Midnight Sun and The Land of Death and Devils Club. I love a long title. I'm a nomadic grant writer, so I travel all over the world helping nonprofits with fundraising. I'm currently in Deadwood, South Dakota. I love all things creepy, gothic, and morbid, as well as dogs and London fog lattes. We also have Gunn Brooke, if you want to give us a wave, who writes romance and science fiction and is working on her 35th novel. Living in the countryside, Gunn enjoys spending time with her family and her dogs, and when she isn't writing, she loves to paint using acrylics and also to dive into all kinds of crafts. Gunn's downtime consists of reading, listening to music, and watching her favorite shows and movies. A homebody at heart, Gunn enjoys being curled up under a blanket in her recliner in the winter and residing on her deck in the summer, surrounded by family, friends, and of course, dogs. We have Chris Bryant as well. Chris writes contemporary romance and erotica. She enjoys binge watching shows, snacking, and working with animal shelters around the world through her Patreon page. She is presently working on her 23rd full-length novel with Bold Strokes. Kryn. Kryn Claxton is the author of the Butch Femme vampire novel Scarlet Thirst and the supernatural detective ghost mystery series. Their latest novel is the genderqueer fantasy adventure Across the Enchanted Border. The supernatural detective won an honorable mention in the Forward Indie Fab Book of the Year Awards and was nominated for the American Library Association Over the Rainbow Book List. Death's Doorway was an Indie Fab finalist and won an honorable mention in the 2015 Rainbow Awards. The Haunting of Oak Springs was runner-up in the Lesfic Bard Awards mystery section. Kryn's a proud butch lesbian. She lives in London with her partner and child. Nicole. Nicole Disney is an award-winning novelist and flash fiction writer whose work delves into the underground worlds hidden beneath the ordinary. Spanning multiple genres of sapphic fiction, her stories pull readers into the raw and unfiltered realities of gang life, domestic violence, drug abuse, poverty, and professional fighting, all while exploring the resilience of the human spirit. Her work has earned recognition from the Forward Indies, the Golden Crowd Literary Society, the Writer's Digest, where her first place story was later adapted into the short film Tomato Soup by Mori Pictures. Beyond writing, she's passionate about martial arts, world travel, and connecting with new people, always seeking inspiration and the beauty of everyday moments. And last but not least, we have Jane. Jane Fletcher is a GCLS award-winning writer and recipient of the Alice B. Reader Appreciation Awards Medal. Her work's been shortlisted for the Galactic Spectrum and Lambda Literary Awards. She's the author of 15 novels published by Bold Strokes, the most recent being A Wolf and Stone. Her love of fantasy began at the age of 7 when she first encountered Greek mythology. This was compounded by a childhood spent clambering over every example of ancient mystery masonry she could find. Her resolute ambition was to become an archaeologist when she grew up, so it was something of a surprise when she became a software engineer instead. Born in Greenwich, London, she's now retired and lives with her wife in southwest England, where she's surrounded by enough historic sites to keep her happy. So thanks everybody for joining us. This panel is all about motivation. So what motivates us to write, what keeps us going through the difficult parts of writing. So I've got a series of questions that I'm gonna ask, and I'm hoping that each author will get to answer each question. We'll see how that goes. So I'll ask it and then I'll just kind of call on you in turn. So my first question for everyone is, you've had your idea. When do you know that you're sufficiently motivated to go ahead and start writing a new book? And I'm going to start with Gunn.
Um, Usually, since when it's about a book, it's you have to submit a synopsis. So you come up with a story idea, and it doesn't go away, and you think, this might be something, and I'll suggest it to Bold Strokes. And I'm very, my proposals getting shorter and shorter and less text because I find if I tell them too much, it's not so fun writing the book. So sometimes Sandy will ask me, but where is the conflict? Well, so, uh, but usually I know when it's time to start writing is when they just won't shut up. It's those
Okay.
voices in my head. They won't shut up and they're demanding to be heard and seen. And I just get all itchy fingers for the keyboard. So that's
Nice.
when it's time.
Okay. Yeah, the character's not shutting up as mine too. Like once I feel like I know the character, then I know like, all right, I can write this book and it'll be fun.
Yeah, time to go. Time to
Yeah.
get started.
Yeah. How about you, Jane?
I'm a plotter. It's when I've actually got the whole plot fixed. So, I mean, I mull things over and over in my head until I've got the plot. I know what happens. First thing I'll sit down, open a blank Word document and put like chapter one, chapter two, and just say what's going to happen in each chapter. Just, a couple sentences.
Hmm.
Vague idea of how many words it'll take. Yeah. And as long as it gets to about 80,000, I think, okay, that's it. I've got a story there. It's not too many chapters, just, they walk around and talk for a bit. So I need to know what I'm writing before I start writing. I need to be able to write not just actually the synopsis, but the skeleton of the story, like what scenes will be involved, what's the plot advancement in each scene, and stuff like that. Make sure all the plot points get covered. I've got the whole thing covered. And then I know, okay, that's it. I've got a novel. I can write it.
So does it I'm curious about this because I'm not a plotter. I'm a little more of a pantser. Does it ever just totally run off the rails for you? Like do you ever just deviate from where you thought you were going?
I'd also say, that the thing about being a plotter is that basically I do the first draft in my head. A lot of people who, they say they're pantsers, they write it and it goes off all over the place. Now, yeah, sometimes I'm thinking the story's going to go one way, but I'm still mulling it over, thinking, no, suppose it happens the other way. So by the time I actually start writing, it's done all the deviating. I've brought
Hmm.
other bits and pieces in. So it's just that effectively the first draft, which is it's easy for me. It's easier than writing it down because it's much easier to edit and change it.
Fair. Okay. Corinne, how about you?
I I'm more with Gun in that basically when a book demands to be written, once the characters are really vivid in my head and I've got a strong story, I'm not a fast writer. Like I give myself quite a bit of time to write, to write a book. I don't sort of, I'd at least take a year, if not longer, to get a book out. So I spend some time with it before I send off a synopsis. But so yeah, so with a completely new book, I it's the story that's come out of usually out of nowhere, unless it's a sequel, as part of a series. But the book that's coming out in March, Across the Enchanted Border, I had no intention of writing this book at all. I thought I was going to write another supernatural detective series book, but actually, the characters and the world just came out of nowhere for me, and I had to write it. I just had to write this book. I think I just needed an adventure myself. I needed an escape and an adventure and a completely different world to the world that I live in. And that motivation was incredibly strong for me to write this book. So it made it more enjoyable to write, actually. It was great.
So Corinne, when you say it came out of nowhere, like what like did you just wake up with this idea? Was there something that kind of sparked it?
It's a good question. That's a really good question that I don't know if I can answer because I'm now writing the sequel to the book that's coming out in March. And I can't remember if there was a definitive moment. With some of my books, I actually can remember the moment when I had the gem of an idea. With this one, I think it was really um all the not attacks as in sort of a really dramatic thing, but the harshness against genderqueer people that have really, I wanted to write a book that has really strong genderqueer warriors,
Mhm.
people who can handle oppression, are already strong fighters, and then place them in situations where they are challenged and
Okay.
learn and
Gotcha.
come together, and there's friendship and there's romance and there's community. And it was so powerful for me to write this book and enjoyable, as well as be able to create completely to like two countries that are completely out of my head. Obviously not entirely out of my head. I must be influenced by all kinds of things, but it's my first fantasy genre novel, sort of completely fantasy genre. So
Okay.
that was hugely, like, world building was hugely enjoyable as well.
Fun. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Chris, how about you? How do you know when you're sufficiently motivated to start a new book?
Sure, I'm gonna follow that. Um, thanks. Thank you. For me, it's basically when I can't stop thinking about it. My friends, we always joke, like I'll finish a book and I always say, okay, I'm gonna take a break. It's time, I'm gonna take a break. And my friends are always like, sure, Jan, you're gonna take a break. And I always think, oh yeah, I'm going to take a month or two, and it usually is really a week. Um, because I don't allow myself to think the next book or the next story until I finish this book. It's
Mm.
kind of my reward. Um, I might there might be like a little seed back there, and I'm like, nope, nope, I won't let it grow until I finish the book I'm working on. So it's my reward. So if I finish this, then I can worry about this little seed back here that wants to grow. And so it's my motivation that I get to work on the next one, but also I have to finish what I'm working on first. And it's kind of a cycle for me. And so it's my reward. And I know that I'm ready for it when I'm done working on this one, my current work in progress. And then I can kind of play with the one that I'm thinking about, that I'm not allowed to think about, but I want to work on. So
You're
it's my
better,
motivation. If I
you're
can't stop
better
thinking
with
about it.
boundary setting than I am.
I am definitely a pantser, and that is it is my only structure that I have. It is my only structure is that I have to finish my job that I'm working right now.
Okay. See, as I'm writing a book, I'm also outlining three or four other
See,
books that I'm going to
no,
write down the line.
no,
I,
no.
I write
I
really
know
fast, thankfully. I
this is
generally
my
write a
only
book.
discipline. That is the only thing I discipline myself on.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't get away with it if I was a slower writer, I think. But yeah,
Mm.
I'm real bad about that kind of thing. All right, Nicole, how about you?
Well, I'm kind of a blend of a lot of the things that everybody has said here. I am very much a plotter. So, in that respect, I know I'm not ready to write and I won't let myself write until I have that skeleton, because otherwise, I know what I'll do is I'll get real excited and I'll write 3 scenes and then I'll have no idea what I'm doing and I'll lose all that motivation.
Mm.
So, the skeleton really, it doesn't give me the motivation, it protects the motivation. But as far as when I get really excited to write and when I know a story is definitely worth pursuing and finishing is when I've got a handful of scenes that I see really vividly that I can't wait to actually put on paper. And so once I've got that, I know I'm excited enough to see a project through, but I won't actually let myself start until I have a solid outline.
Okay. Makes sense. All right, I want to kind of circle back to a theme that Corinne mentioned just a little bit in a little bit more depth, because I know this has been really important for me lately. I'm in the US, and so when I wake up in the morning, I see the news, and those external events can really, for me, hinder my motivation. I have to be really careful that what's going on outside doesn't impact, the way that I'm writing and how frequently I'm writing and things like that. So I'm curious for the rest of you too, what types of external events can impact your motivation? And if an external event is impacting your motivation, how do you put it aside, and how do you get through it if you do? So let's start with Chris.
For me, I mean, I know that, it's so tumultuous politically here in the United States. And like I said, I'm trying desperately to get this my current work in progress done. But for me, it's more of an emotional. It's dealing with personal issues. It's dealing with my day job. I have a very large project that I'm trying to button up right now with work, and it takes all of my energy. So I have been pushing this book out because it's it's just my work, that is my day job, that has taken all of my energy, and this has never happened before. So that is taking my energy, and when it's not my day job, and it's like personal issues, or if I am watching the news and I'm working at the and I'm writing at the same time, I notice that my words, when I go back and edit what I've written, I've noticed that my words are a little harsher and edgier, and so then I have to go back and soften things. But normally I don't let the outside world influence my told you, delivery. I don't let like the outside world influence my writing as I'm writing it, unless I allow it to. So the politicals, like, I have tuned that all out. Ever since the inauguration, I haven't really been watching the news. I'm just trying to get my life and this book done, and then I'll face the world. I'll come out and I'll face the world when this is done.
Okay.
But it does, but it's hard. I have to push that aside for now.
Yeah, me too. And damn those jobs.
I know. Oh, they get in the
Yeah,
way. They get in the
I'm
way.
a federal grant writer, so it's a chaotic world for
Oh, I
grant
bet.
writing
Yeah.
right now, and trying to like shove that aside and get the writing done can
Yeah.
definitely be a challenge. Jane, how about you? What kind of external things can impact your motivation?
Everything. I'm easily distracted. Um, it's not so much any one particular event. It's just, yeah, if I ever lost the internet, I would be so much more productive. It's, I've perhaps wanting to reach, some idea like, okay, how far was it from somewhere to somewhere else? Or how long would it take to get, by boat from this sort of
Right.
distance? And 3 hours later, I'm reading incidents of scurvy in Outer Mongolia or something. I just disappear down rabbit holes all the time. It takes an awful lot of willpower to stop surfing and reading interesting things online and actually get down to writing. So everything distracts me. Um,
I
yeah,
understand. I'm a rabbit hole person too, and because I write crime, like my internet searches just get real weird real quick.
yeah, yeah.
Gun, how about you? Oh, you're muted. So there you
I
go.
was muted. I was just fixing the mic. Um, I usually am pretty good at diving into the stories and immersing myself. But when I struck by something very emotional, Sweden had their first school shooting a few weeks ago ever, and a very high death toll. And I just had to hibernate and hide somewhere and get my head sorted because that was so unexpected. Sweden's pretty innocent in some ways. So, um, but other than that, I think I sometimes use my writing to just block things out. And then I totally go on all the news websites and the despair sometimes. Um, but other than that, it's emotional stuff, whether it's personal, something happening to my family or something like that. It can definitely, I can also see it in my text, like Chris said, afterwards, that I sometimes wonder, oh, was I feeling like that? So, I think writing has always been a way for me to cope with things. And sometimes when everything, the world seems crazy, stuff is happening, whether it's horrible, no matter what it is, I just dive into my stories, whether it's fan fiction or it's the books. It's I really use it a lot like a crutch. Absolutely.
Rhapsody, I know as soon as this panel's done, I'm going to end up Googling videos of 90-year-old Russian women playing slide guitar using a light bulb. If you're not following the chat, you should be. All right, Nicole, what kind of external factors play into your motivation?
When it comes to like world news and politics, I think a lot of us sort of feel like a responsibility to be aware of it and engaged with it in some way. And for me, actually, it's helpful to my writing because that's kind of my one little protected zone where I feel like I have permission to disengage now and stop worrying about that and kind of close the door on that and just take a little mental break from that. So for me, external things in that way is actually helpful to me because it helps me really separate writing time from lifetime and just be fully immersed in writing time. What affects me more is more just like my own life stuff. If you're just emotionally not in a good place to write, and that depends on the situation. Sometimes the best thing for you is to go write, and sometimes you just have to, give yourself a little grace and say it's not going to happen today. So you just got to kind of feel out which one of those you're in.
I understand that. I'm a chronic migraineur, and so if I have a bad enough migraine, it's like, you know what, this is just not going to happen, and that's okay. Corinne, how about you? What kind of external motivators? You mentioned this a little in your last answer.
I did, and I have very much been. I think that this book, my latest book, has come out of not just your lovely new president over across the pond, but our last Tory government, who were attacking the most vulnerable people in our land, if you like, people risking their lives in tiny little boats trying to get across the channel in desperate situations, and trans children in schools. And it was such a sickening thing to do that really any of the baddies that I write in any of my books can't hold up to the abuse of power that people in our world are capable of, of the evil that they're prepared to to wreak havoc on innocent people, really. So those situations were very much motivating me, as well as representing and being surrounded by lots of gender warriors within my sort of existence in the last sort of, as an out queer adult, and wanting to create characters who are up front and center and proud to be proud in their diversity, which is of course what Bold Strokes Books does so beautifully and so well. And to reach out to readers, particularly young genderqueer readership. Like this book is 13 plus. It's actually an adult book. It's aimed at adult readership, but it's accessible to 13-year-olds and above. And that was really important to me, to have some representation for younger gender diverse people.
Right.
So yeah, I really have been motivated.
Okay, awesome. All right, so the next question is probably a little more tangible, maybe a little more practical. Is there a particular point in the writing process that you find it really, really challenging to get through? I know for me, for some reason, 2/3 of the way through a book, I'm about 60,000 words in. I have a very predictable existential crisis of, why am I writing this? Who's going to read it? Why is this important? I start doubting kind of everything about the book. And then I have to go through and that's when I actually outline out the rest of the book, just so that I get through the rest of it. And it picks up, it doesn't last long. It picks up again pretty quickly. But do the rest of you have anything like that where a certain point just always gets you? And Nicole, I'll start with you.
For me, it's not necessarily like a predictable point in the story, but I'm just very bad at writing messy. Like I have a really strong inner critic. So when I'm writing and things are coming out the way I want them to, I'm great. And it doesn't really matter where I am in the story. I'm happy as can be. But if I'm at one of those places where it just doesn't want to come out the way I want it to, and I know intellectually the right thing to do is to just put something down and move through it, trust the process, you'll fix it later. And I just struggle with that. So I'll just like stay on this scene and just be like, if I leave this scene this ugly, I'm not a writer. Like I can't do this. Like it's too bad. Like what if I die and someone reads it? Like I can't. So that's my biggest thing is just getting past that. It's like it's not going to come out perfect the first time. And I just for some reason keep thinking maybe it will, but I gotta like work through that mentally. Like just okay, this one's gonna be ugly. You'll fix it later.
Right. Okay. Fair. Corinne, how about you?
I should just stop bothering to mute myself, really, because there's this big pause. I used to write, when I first started writing novels, I used to write really chronologically. So I'd write one scene, then the next scene, then the next scene, then the next scene. And I was much more of a pantster in those days, but now I plot things a lot more. So I've got an outline, sort of chapter by chapter, before I write scenes. So what I do now is if I sit down to write a scene and I'm just not feeling it, or I'm just not excited to write it, or it's just not flowing, then I don't write it. I jump all round the book. I might jump to the nearly the end of the book, or I might jump to another point, something that I really, really am motivated and want to write. And I find that that's what keeps things fresh for me. And I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing or not in some ways, because it sort of feels disjointed, but it actually for me, being able to enjoy the writing is what keeps it fresh. And I think that is what makes it hopefully exciting to read. You know, if it's difficult for me to write, then I can't imagine why anyone would want to read it, if you see what I mean, because it's
Gotcha. Okay. I'm amazed by people who can do that. I've always been a chronological. I start at chapter one and I write straight through to the ending. I'm just amazed by people who can switch back and forth between scenes like that. That's interesting. Gina, I do see your question in the chat. Remember to, if you've got questions, to put them in the Q&A, but we will come back to that one because it's a good question. For now, Gunn, can you talk just a little bit about how this works for you?
Well, I usually have two places in the manuscript. I don't feel like even if I really see my characters, I can't really hear them until I'm in like chapter 4. So before then, I feel like I'm kind of thinking I'm going to have to go back and redo this whole thing because these people are not acting the way I thought they would. And then, of course, I have that, like you said, 3/4 mark, or like anywhere around 60-70% of the book. I think, no, this is gotta be the worst stuff I've ever written, and this is what's wrong with my language. I can't speak English anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. I think Shelley, my editor, is gonna have a cow. It's like, no. And then when I started going towards the end, and that's when I dare to look at the beta readers, what they've been saying, because I don't look at what they're saying until I'm almost done, sometimes when I'm done. And they're very honest. So if they think things are really fun or interesting or whatever, I start to breathe again. It's like, oh, help. So somewhere in the beginning, towards the 3/4 mark, that's usually where I doubt myself immensely.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who has the full-blown existential, what am I doing with my life crisis.
Exactly. People with imposter syndrome. People will finally realize that I can't write to save my life.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, but it's the way it is.
It's the thing.
It passes. And it passes.
I had a question for you too. You mentioned not looking at what your beta readers are saying until you're close to finish. At what point in the manuscript do you start giving to your beta readers?
I start sending when I have like those 4 or 5 chapters, I start sending them, and they know that they come so sporadically in the beginning, and then towards the end when I'm on fire, they're like, what are you doing? I just sent you something. I gotta eat, gun. It's like, so, but they're fantastic. They're amazing. So I have one in America, one in South Africa, and one in Sweden sometimes, and sometimes one in Germany. So I get the really good input. So absolutely.
Interesting. I'm a little, I guess I'm selfish with my manuscripts. I don't give them until they're finished.
Oh, I think they'd faint. I think they like getting it in
In pieces.
pieces.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm too much of a people pleaser. I would just modify the story based on what people wanted, I think.
But I don't read much. I thank them
Right.
for their efforts, and I
Smart.
have folders for each of them. I'm very organized that way.
Okay. Interesting. All right,
Yeah.
Jane, do you get the existential crisis?
Not particularly.
Oh, lucky you. Is there any point in the novel that really kind of trips you up?
The writing, all of it. I'm not a natural writer. I've always told myself stories from the time I was a little kid when I realized what stories were. So I've always developed stories. I always tell myself stories. I
Yeah.
love editing. Editing is great. I've
Ah.
done all the hard work. I can go around and okay, I knew I'd get from you. I've done all the hard work. I can go around, I can polish it, I can change things, I can sort it out.
Mhm.
It's just for me, writing is a bit of a slog. I don't enjoy writing, but I love having written. Finishing a book is probably the best feeling, and that's what keeps me through the writing, knowing that I'll finish, I can write the end, and that's it. I can just sit back and bask in the sense of achievement.
That's
Um,
so
it's like, I don't run marathons, but I've walked marathons, and it's something about, you're starting off and there's 26 miles ahead of you or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's great when you finish to look back and think, yeah, I did it.
That's exactly what every time I go to the gym to lift, I'm like, I have to drag myself there. But afterward, I'm like, I'm really glad I did that. So it sounds like that's the same thing. Okay. And Chris, how about you? Is there any part in the writing process that demotivates you and you have to power through?
Probably two. I don't like writing conflict. I really don't. Most of my conflict is external. I feel like I love the whole idea of people falling in love and living happily ever after. And so I also don't like writing the second half of the book. So when you write the whole meet cute and they get together and they have sex and then everything is perfect and I want to turn in the book and say that's a wrap at the end and I turn it in, or I want to turn it in and they're like, that's only 30,000 words. It's not really a book. So finish the book. And so, so then I have to, that whole second half, I have to figure out what happens. So it's kind of like the last, probably the last 2/3 of the book, try to wrap it up, figure out, like that therein lies the conflict. And then the last third of the book is where I struggle the most.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned conflict. I love writing a
I
good
don't like
conflict scene.
conflict. I feel reality. I mean, I know books aren't real and stuff like that, but I think in reality, like a lot of conflicts are resolved, just by conversations
Right.
and a lot of times, you read a book and you're like, come on, this can be done and like just sit down and have a conversation and you get so
Right.
mad at the character. It's like, just talk. So that's why my conflicts are usually like, oh, they live a continent apart, there's a whole
Right.
ocean between them.
Mhm.
So those are the kind of conflicts I like because it's something I can deal with. But
Right.
because I talk all the time. I'm the kind of person that like even at work, like I settle my conflicts and I resolve them right away. So it's hard for me to try to write a conflict that is strictly based upon misunderstandings or that miscommunications. To me it doesn't work for me. So trying to
Okay.
come up with conflict really is a hard thing for me.
Gotcha. I'm the opposite, where the conflict part is easy, but I'm ace and arrow, and writing romance scenes for me is I
Oh,
that's the
really?
part that I'm like, ugh.
We're going to collaborate on something one day.
There you go. Perfect. And Nicole, you better pet that cat. I
I
see
know
it.
I am. I'm like trying to like keep her happy right here. I told you guys we
Good.
might end up seeing tails and stuff.
You know, that's always the best part of like a Zoom
It
something is
is.
being a pet. And we get the good
Oh,
big face on that one too. So Tina had a question in the chat about dropping breadcrumbs and whether we intentionally drop breadcrumbs as we're writing. I know for me, I have to because I write crime. And so, you know, if I don't leave breadcrumbs along the way, it's going to be problematic. But I know that's difficult in editing because, you know, when you edit crime fiction, everything at the end has to add up. And so I have to go back and really carefully track all my breadcrumbs and make sure that they're leading to the right place, but they're also not too obvious. So the breadcrumbs is a real like, it's why right now I'm writing YA dystopian fiction and not crime. Uh, so for the rest of you, Jane, do you breadcrumb as you go, or how's that work with your process? Because you're so kind of plotster.
Actually, a lot of my books, although they're normally fantasy, certainly the most recent one, Wolf in Stone, there's actually a whodunit murder mystery going on, and it's the sequel to A Fox in Shadow, which again has a murder mystery in it.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm a great fan of Agatha Christie, and for that, yeah, you that's actually part of the plotting. It's not so much a who done it as a how done it. If you
Right.
read the Agatha Christie's, it is realizing that somebody wasn't where they said they were, or somebody lied about something, or anyway, and for that, you really do have to plan it out, everything in advance: who is where, when, what, and the other. And that is one of the things that I do plot out beforehand. That I
Mhm.
know how the murder happened, who did it. So for
Mhm.
something like that, definitely, I have to, yeah, that's actually what whodunit is. It's putting the clues in,
Right.
telling people things before the reader know that it's significant.
Mhm.
And that's actually part of the way Agatha Christie works is she'll tell you something in the early chapters. And of course, it just goes in, and as a reader, you forget about it. And at the end, when Poirot says, "But you did so and so when you said you were there," and you think, "Oh, yeah, of course." And actually, it worked as a prompt. And you remember then that, yeah, in chapter 3, that happened. And that's why often you'll read an Agatha Christie and get to the end of it and think, yeah, I should have guessed it. It's
Right.
because there's a whole load of useful information, there's a whole load of extraneous information,
Mhm.
and it's actually plotting the route through it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Okay.
do that.
Okay. Does anyone else want to talk to that issue of breadcrumbing, whether you do it or not?
Sure. I mean, I think for me, what I'm doing is less dropping breadcrumbs and more going back and finding them when I need them. Because I think of it as like when you're writing, you're putting all these pieces on the board. There's all this stuff out there. And then when I get to a point in the story where maybe I have a problem I need to solve, I'm looking at the board and being like, all right, what do I have to work with here? And like, what would be a creative way to solve this issue? Or what is at my disposal? And then I'll just pick up this little piece of information that was really incidental and now I'll make it important.
Mm.
So and occasionally, if I need something more, I'll go back and write it in, but very seldom am I consciously being like, here's a breadcrumb.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Rhapsody also has a question in the chat. And we probably because we touched on this briefly about imposter syndrome. And the question is, how deeply does imposter syndrome affect you and how do you deal with it? Yeah, I know. For me, that, like I said, it comes up at that kind of 2/3, 3/4 point where I have my existential crisis. But that's the only place it hits me in writing. I don't generally write for other people. I write because I'm a compulsive writer. Because I feel like I need to. So imposter syndrome hits me hard in the editing process. Where and my editor's absolutely lovely, but when she'll come back and say, oh no, why did you write this way or da da da, and I'm like, oh, she's discovered me that I'm not a writer, that I don't know what I'm doing. So it's for me, as soon as there's another set of eyes, and even when my book comes out in published form, I'm always so like when people tell me they're reading and I'm like, no, don't tell me, I don't want to know. Like I just assume you hate it. So that's kind of how affects me. Does anyone else want to speak to that? I'm sure it affects us all in different ways.
I could say the only time I really got it was the York Literary Festival, which I know Corinne knows about. But yeah, it was the very first time Jenny Roberts organised it. And I had my first book out and I got invited, and there was a lecture theatre full, about 400 women in it. And there's three of us authors sitting on the stage, and I sat down and everyone's looking at me. And I was kind of expecting someone to come and tap me on the shoulder and tell me to go and sit in the audience because it was authors on stage. But yeah, that was the only time I really felt like an imposter sitting there on the stage the first time with a live audience in front of me.
There.
And here you are now, here Jane is now, all these novels later, appearing in all kinds of festivals,
Right?
to far bigger audiences at York as well, and doing so well. So, but Bailey, what you were saying actually, in terms of imposter syndrome of the exact book that you happen to be writing at the time, I'm sort of all happy with my book, and then I have that moment when I send it out to beta readers, and I'm really, really excited and love my beta readers and value them more than life. You know, they're wonderful and I treasure them. But I still am sort of sitting there thinking, oh, well, will they get this, and what will they think of that, and will it make any sense, and will they absolutely hate it? And I sort of ask them for honesty, because if I can't get honesty from beta readers, I'm only setting myself up for a world of potential pain from my editor and then potentially from readership, general readership. So yeah, that's when imposter, that little worry, I think it's good, I like it. I like it. Will everybody, you know?
Right. Yeah, I have my sister beta read for me, which is the harshest thing you can do to yourself as a writer. Because you know, a sibling is absolutely your biggest critic. So I always know, like, if it passes Natasha, like it's probably gonna be okay. There's another question from Shendi, and this is probably the last big question we'll have before we wrap up. Is an emerging writer, what would you say to your earlier self who's embarking on their first book to give yourself support and advice? I think for me, I accidentally did it the right way. Before I ever thought about delving into a novel, I wrote a lot of short stories and a lot of flash fiction. And I think flash fiction is the best exercise you can do for yourself as a writer, because it forces you to tell a story in a tiny compressed space. And then you can write bigger and bigger from there. But if you can write a flash story, you can write pretty much anything. Does anyone else want to respond to that? What advice would you give your earlier, just starting out self?
Enjoy it. That's my main thing. Like really, really, really enjoy writing. I'd say to anyone who wants to write a novel as opposed to a poem, or you know, or even a short story, you've got to be in for the long haul, and it's lonely. It can be, you know. So you just, if you're not enjoying the process and you're making yourself do it, you know, maybe it's not for you. But if you are enjoying it, then you persevere with it and keep going, and get people around you who will give you really, really honest feedback, and also learn as much as you can about the craft of writing. Join courses, join a writers group, you know, just immerse yourself in the world, and it will pay dividends.
Also read Bird by Bird. What if I ever get stuck, that's always my go back to reading. Does anyone else want to answer that one?
You know, in some ways, I think I want advice from my beginner self more than the other way around. I mean, I think as a beginning writer, you don't have the skills yet. Your first several projects are going to suck. You know that you need to learn, you need to read, you need a community. So all of those things I think are correct and are just the process you have to go through. But what was so cool about being a beginning writer is there's no pressure. You have no readers, you have no expectations. You're just doing it because you want to. And like it's you kind of lose that. The more books that you do and the more you get focused on the business side of writing, a lot of that can get complicated. So I think in some ways I look to my beginner writer self and be like, do that, like acquire the skills, but maintain that kind of beginner feeling.
Okay.
What she said.
Yeah, that's a good response. All right. Anyone else want to follow that up before we get to our last question? Okay, so my last question for you, and this really speaks to kind of whether you're an intrinsically or an extrinsically motivated writer. If someone cast a spell on you that all of your manuscripts, as soon as you write them, they would just immediately vanish, would you still write? Jane?
No. That's easy.
Ooh,
I just look for myself stories
okay,
because I can't stop making up stories.
right.
But the only reason point of writing them is to share them with other people. And if I can't share them, there's just no point writing them down. It's not the act of writing, it's the act of creation of the tale, of the environment, everything else that goes into it.
Okay, I'm the exact opposite. I would absolutely yes, and probably write even more because I like the actual act of the writing itself and the words and moving the words around on the page. How about you, Gunn?
If it disappeared, I think I would still write, but knowing me, I would probably cheat and leave it a few words out so it wasn't actually quite finished. So, um, but yeah, the writing in itself is so much fun that I think I would still write. But bummer if it disappeared though. That would be
So you'd write, but maybe you wouldn't polish.
it leave the last sentence half or
Okay.
something like that. I would
Oh, yeah,
cheat
you leave it
probably.
just unfinished. Oh, okay, that way it
Mm.
wouldn't disappear. That's smart. Okay.
So
Chris, how about you? If it was going to disappear, would you still write?
No. No. Well, I would write poetry, but I would not write a manuscript. I would not write books. No.
Okay,
Time.
interesting. Oh, that's fair.
Time.
Okay.
I'm entirely too busy to have something I love disappear after I write it. I would just stick with poetry and continue on with my life, doing
Okay.
other things.
Okay. Cran, how about you?
That's the most devastating concept
Right?
that an author,
Terrible.
truly, Bailey. I mean, when I saw that question, I just despaired of that idea because I
I
can
like
imagine.
to be an asshole once in a while.
No, I can imagine such a
Winner.
horrible dystopian world. Gosh, the practical part of me says no, I wouldn't because I want to share. I'm writing to share, but I also really love the process most of the time. But I think I'm a very practical person, so I would probably spend an awful lot of time trying to work out how I could make it not magically disappear.
Right.
I thought
Get
about
around that
this.
rule.
Okay, I thought about this because I like to be prepared for potential horrible issues, and I would revert to the oral tradition of storytelling.
There you go. Good one. All right, Nicole.
I'm so relieved that like not everyone was just like, yes, absolutely, because that's what I thought was going to happen. Like Chris, I would probably write something sometimes because I do enjoy, writing just for the sake of it, and working through certain situations or whatever. I don't know if it would be flash fiction or just really rough drafts or short stories. I'd probably do something. But would I complete a perfect manuscript? Probably not, because it's just too big of a piece of it is sharing it. And there's a connection that you're seeking when you're creating like a full polished manuscript, and you're not going to have that. So a little of everyone. I'd probably write anyway to an extent, but not fully. And I would probably seek other forms of storytelling to fulfill the rest.
Okay, so I'm going to be the only person on my deserted island with 200 finished manuscripts that no one's ever going to read, and I'm actually like paradise. Yes.
They're gone. They're gone. They don't
Okay.
exist.
Well, right, that's
I'm
true.
angry at you for that question. I'm gonna
Well,
leave
then
here
I've done
angry.
my job. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's about time. So to end on On that fun note of someone being mad at me, I'm going to wake up in 10 years and remember you said that, by the way. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to the audience for your really, really good questions.
Mm.
It's been fun, and enjoy the rest of the event, everybody.
Bye.